there had been, if I remember your question, you asked, had there been any opposition by school districts to the at-risk or to the SPED components after the committee had passed it out? Was that your question?
I think I did ask that.
Okay,
Yeah.
something like that. Well, I would, and the answer was no, there had not been any. So what was your answer?
We'll have to replay the tape, but I did not say there was no
No,
opposition.
after the,
I hadn't she asked if I had communicated with any of those, and I said no.
well, good, fine, thanks. Because when let's see, on February 7th, when then we did discuss the at-risk component, there was a huge number of opponents. In fact, we had KPI as the oral and one written, and we had about at least 10 districts, with other, and they're identified in the supplemental note. And then on February 13th, when we discussed the SPED and the LOB component, KPI was the only proponent, and there were about 100 opponents, of which about 9 or 10 were school districts, and they also identified in the supplemental note. So I think for the record and for clarity, that is something that would have given you or provided you with a fuller answer of the question. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I think what I was a little bit more curious about was with regard to the longitudinal studies and so forth. I've never had a problem with the longitudinal studies because that's already been in law. My problem with it so far is that we've never received any of that information. I mean, we had created criteria for how at-risk funding was to be used. And so I was just curious what the feedback was with regard to that proposed component of the cohorts. Because I was trying to grasp if it was an individual building for school districts, the large school districts, how they would would it be a student from each building? And so I think when our vice chair is here, we'll get a little bit more into that because I do have a proposal for the House to consider. But from a discussion standpoint, I would like to address a little bit because I know that there is language in the bill and the reviser. My reviser's not here, but fortunately your reviser, Nick, is here. So Nick, help us in the bill with regard to assessments and what changes can and can't happen with assessments in the bill. And if you could share what page that is, that would be really helpful. Okay, just heard page 49. If you could just share that with us, please.
Yeah, so this is on page 49, subsection B there at the bottom of page 49. What this provision states is that the state board shall not substantially revise or update the ELA or math curriculum standards that are in effect on July 1, 2024 in a manner that would necessitate the development of new statewide assessments in ELA or math until the long-term goal to have 75% of all students achieve at level 3 and 4 is met.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. I was looking for that early this morning and couldn't find it because there is an issue that I have brought up in our committee before, and I think I mentioned it slightly yesterday, but I want to talk to it a bit more because I think we need to determine whether this needs to be put into law or whether the Department of Education will make sure that this happens. But So I have a graph. It's been published. The department or the Board of Regents provided it to us in one of our hearings. And it shows the percent of students that are reading at grade level. And the interesting thing about it is it compares the 2018 state assessments with the assessments from 2023. And what's really kind of remarkable about it is the lines are almost parallel. So that's interesting. But the component that makes no sense is grade 3. It shows 70% from 2018 and 68% from 2023. And then when you look at grade 4, it spikes up to 84%. So you're seeing a 14% increase for 2018, and it spikes to 81% from 68 for 2023. So again, as you see the two different colors on the line graph. But the interesting thing is then when you look at fifth grade, it drops right back down. And for 2023, it drops right back down to exactly the same percent. The 68 for third graders bumps up to 81%, for fourth graders drops down to 68%. So in looking at that graph and talking to folks that really are statisticians, that really do, their research is based on finding consistencies and anomalies. That fourth grade and the fact that it spikes and then drops right back down to the next grade level, what that really is, that is considered an extreme outlier. And that's why I wanted to make sure on the language, because it wouldn't change the standards for fourth grade, but it's the instrument that's the outlier. And we've not heard from the Department of Education that they've ever circled back around with the University of Kansas on that. But that fourth grade assessment needs to be addressed because it is such an outlier. To see a 14% spike and then have it immediately be a 14% drop for those bookmark grades is something that needs to be addressed. So I think that's one of the things that we really need to know from the Department of Education before we push this out of committee, how they feel they can address it. Does it need to be codified into the language of this bill? Or is this something that absolutely would be addressed? Again, it's not going to change the standards that the state board has set. It is simply the assessment tool. So I just wanted to bring that up, that I want our revisers to know that it may be something that we need language for, but I also want to give the Department of Ed a little bit of time between now and tomorrow morning to figure out how we get that resolved, because it does need to be resolved. The other thing is that I think it would be helpful to know when we're looking at what you're looking for with regard to that longitudinal information. I think it's fair to ask if the Department of Education can let us know. I mean, we have had the University of Kansas testify several different times in our Senate Education Committee, and I think that K through 12 has had them come testify before. Not KU. Well, KU is who writes the assessments. But what they have shared with us is with our contract for the assessments, they also provide pre-assessments. And my recollection is that they provide up to 4 pre-assessments for every district, but it may be 5. And so one, I'd like us to clarify that as far as what the number is. But the other thing, and it's at no charge to the school district, and it's for all of the different grade levels. So what we don't know is, do they track which school districts actually utilize those pre-assessments? I think that that would be helpful to know. And the other component is, it's my understanding that all districts are doing the state assessments online. So did the results go to the University of Kansas for them to come? Where I'm seeing a head nod is yes. Okay. So the school district doesn't know yet until KU then verifies the scores. So that would be something that if we could find that out. But the other thing is the same thing true for the practice assessments? Do the scores go to KU or do they stay there within the district? I think that would be helpful. And then the one last thing would be on those pre-assessments, are they like a pop quiz that you have in the class where it's an abbreviated version, or is it really similar to the state assessment? It might not be the exact same number, but is it roughly about the same? So, and the reason I ask that, and I've mentioned it before, so for Senator Sykes, this will be boring to hear it again. But for the rest of you, it's probably going to be new. But when I taught at the high school and I did have to proctor state assessments, that was the only time that those kids took an assessment online. There was no other time during that semester or the school year that they ever took an assessment online. And so anything that you might glean about, is it still online? Is the practice assessment online also? Because for a lot of folks, I would never want to take, I am so glad that when I did my praxis and my GRE that I didn't have to do it online. I would never want to take a high stakes assessment online. And I know I'm old school, so for students it would be different, but it's only different for students if they've had the practice taking assessments, any type of quiz, test online. That changed when I was teaching at the college level distance learning courses. But the students that had the most difficulty completing their exams for a distance learning course were the students that had never done anything like that before. And so to take a timed exam was very difficult for them. So any of that feedback that we could get, it's fine with me if you email that to us, or tomorrow morning you have something that you can just share with us. I think that that would be helpful. So I will now ask of the committee members, including my ranking minority, did you have any questions about what was presented yesterday? That's in essentially the contents. So Senator Sykes.
There's probably lots of questions, but one I know kind of on that same section B, I know that the state board, they have that rolling assessment where they're looking at the standards. And if there's a way that research could get that information, because I feel like in the last 8 years, they have looked at math and English. But if this went into law, that would kind of eliminate some of those changes.
So I'm going to say to my co-chair, yes.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. All right, so we did ask Ben Proctor and about the standards and how are we doing, and he said in testimony to our committee that we should not be changing the standards. We haven't yet arrived. We haven't gotten the kids to the level that we need to, and he was in agreement that until we get up to that goal, we should not. And I wish I knew exactly what day that was, but I would hate to ask you to watch all those videos, but it is on there. Ben Proctor did state that.
if I may follow up, I just know they're supposed to be looking at those in like every 7 years and kind of, I think they start at like 5 years beginning the process. So just kind of to have an idea of where they were and when those were last looked at.
And again,
Yeah, and I think that's great. We don't want to interfere with that. The shall was just changed to may in the statute, and then just basically says don't substantially change it so we can keep on track. They can still have room to do changes or make changes.
okay. One thing, could we talk a little bit, because we talk about proficiency and we talk about reading at grade level. So, and I know that Chair Williams, your committee has talked about that as well. So share with us proficiency as defined by the State Board for the federal government. So what in this bill, what do you show as that proficiency?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So actually, we used the report that was filed by the Kansas Department of Education. I believe it was 2017. And that report stated that proficiency goals were set to reach levels 3 and 4, and they wanted all students, 75% of all students score in performance levels 3 and 4 combined in the statewide assessments in English language arts and mathematics by 2030. And we think that's an outstanding goal. And I did a little bit of quick review on the definitions because it did come up in committee. And I found, of course, our current Kansas Department of Education definitions, and I had the definitions as they were in 2017. And I have the Dell Dennis definitions per email 21619 that clarifies that. And really, I think the key term is in the graph that you've provided, you're saying that we're looking at those students that are at grade level. And in 2017, it said level 1 indicates that student is not performing at grade level standards. Currently, we take away that grade level, but I think we're all on the same page that level 1, that limited ability. But what I kind of want to look at was the level 2 briefly, because level 2 is included as percentage of students reading at grade level. And I would caution being enthusiastic about including level 2. And the reason is because the 2017 definition says it indicates that the student is doing grade level work as defined by standards, but not at the depth or level of rigor to be considered on track for college success. Whereas we have it currently basic ability. And I don't think anybody would want to stop or limit our students' ability to climb above basic ability. And Dell Dennis's explanation said that KSDE interchanges the terms college and career ready and proficient. The definition for the terms are the same, level 3 or 4 on the state assessment are college and career ready and proficient. He also said student reports use the term college and career ready and federal reports use the term proficient. So anytime we see college and career ready, it should mean 3 and 4. And that's the same as proficient. He also did say something very interesting for this committee to know. He said that the 300 cut score is the score for level 3 that's the same on all examinations, whether grade or math or ELA. And I found that interesting that that is the hard cut that they have determined. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Say that again. What's the hard cut?
300, the number 300 that determines proficiency at, according to Dell Dennis on 2619, he says 300 is the score for a level 3 at all grades and on all assessments. I have the exact quote. I think he worked for the department for like 70 years, so I bet he probably knows.
Representative Nguyen, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Do you have a link to your chart?
I
I
don't.
can let you, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I can let you take a picture of it because this is a chart that I made it.
Not that chart, the
Oh.
chart that, Senator, your graph.
I didn't bring my backpack today or down here for the meeting, but you can have it. I printed off a bunch of those. I have an extra one up in my backpack. So you've got those. Is that right?
So, Senator, that was part of Dr. Lane's testimony on Senate Bill 532. So I will send you a copy of that testimony to conferees.
It came from the Board of Regents and they've shared it in multiple presentations. Great. So everyone will get a PDF of it.
Have it. Thanks.
I am waiting to see. I still don't have an update from, yes.
All right, while you're looking for an update from your members, I will go ahead and go on record a conversation with Dr. Harwood about an item at risk related to peer review. And so I'm just saying it out loud so we remember to include it. Peer review, the language that we put in there, unbeknownst to us, has a higher standard from the federal perspective. So we would strike that portion, and it relates to districts having to peer review their provisional practices or programs. And so we would probably just strike it, or if for simplicity, it could just be district review, which is the same thing as basically striking it. So whichever works out better. So just kind of on the record, doesn't have to be a formal offer or anything like that, but I don't want to forget that little item.
I think that we could agree to that. So is it just in the one location or does it appear in multiple locations? Nick, could you please share with us what page and what line?
So the only location with respect to the provisional at-risk programs that I'm aware where, well, it looks like there might be two locations. So there's a location, let's turn to page 48 of the bill. In the definition of provisional at-risk educational program, you see in paragraph C, there's subparagraph C, that the provisional programs are subject to peer review to evaluate whether such program provides evidence-based instruction. So the change there would be to district review.
Yes.
Well, I'm wondering if it should be state board review because they don't move this item from the list without state board. Would that be appropriate? I mean, or no? It says, subject to peer review to evaluate whether such program provides evidence-based instruction. We could mark it as district or state board.
I need you to just go ahead and come to the microphone and just introduce yourself.
Thank you, Frank Harwood, Deputy Commissioner of the State Board of Education. So there are two different parts in there. One, it talks about if it meets peer review, then it shall be placed on the list. The problem is that the district can't peer review it. That is there's a federal definition of that. So district review would be fine. I think other places in the bill, they are reporting the progress. So it could be, that's already going to happen, that they're reporting the progress to the State Board of Education anyway. So I think that the idea is that the district will review it to see if it's making the progress that they expected. Because again, for the provisional, what the district is saying is that what the reason that they think it will make a difference for at-risk students. And so they would review that. And if it doesn't, then I think the expectation is they would be looking at doing something different. So I think district review is exactly what you want to make sure that we said it was going to do this. Is it doing that? Understanding that they still only have 4 years for the cohort. And I think it may be also in the definition, on the definition section, that may be there as well.
So the two locations that this is appearing that I'm seeing right away is in the definition on page 48 for provisional at-risk educational program, and then also on page 46 when it's discussing how school districts may implement provisional at-risk educational programs.
Okay. And we are in agreement to make those changes. There is one other thing, since we are talking about the at-risk at this time. I think that right now, roughly for this, at least this school year, the at-risk funding is roughly at about, is it $730 million? Am I close to that? The pre-K? Okay. So we're right at about 730 million. Okay. That's with pre-K and LOB. So I guess one thing that would be helpful if the department could get us some feedback. So how is it, because it's come up in the 2 legislative post audits with regard to salaries and benefits for classroom teachers coming out of at-risk funding. What report is it that the Department of Ed has to determine just how wide that practice is? And if we're looking at $730 million total, roughly what percent do we think we're not talking about SPED classroom teachers, but we're talking specifically about the traditional classroom teacher. What percent do you think of the 730 is being used in that way by school districts?
So in the guidance for at-risk expenditures, it says that you cannot base a classroom teacher's salary on either the percentage of free lunch students or at-risk students. The only way you can spend at-risk funding on a classroom teacher is a portion of time where they are implementing a approved at-risk program or service. So it's already in the department's guidance that what you explained and what has been in the post audits is not allowed. The department only audits payments, so we don't have the staff to audit expenditures. We have been in discussion with the idea that as long as we stay fully staffed on our audit staff, that we will do some at least some sampling of at-risk expenditures to get a handle on that. So we don't have that information, and even from the post audit, they said that they could not. Their sample size was too small in order to extrapolate that farther on. So I don't have a guess on what that would be. We have said that that is not an acceptable practice. I mean, because of post audit, I can't say that it doesn't happen. And we are looking at a way to at least do some audit sampling to make sure that it's not happening anymore in that manner.
So, well, part of what I'm trying to determine is there some type of report when the district is submitting their budget for approval, but there isn't any line item or any separate page report that really addresses that particular issue. So it's not reported in a manner that you are able to track or do a run on.
We do not. It's not reported in that way at this point in time.
Okay. Is that something that you've talked about, finding a way to do that? Or, part of the concern is we know the law's not being followed. So how do we track? And if there were to really be this crunch on it, we can't even determine how broad or how deep the practice is. And we still haven't figured out how it is, what new language would be needed to address that. And you know, there's the carrot and the stick process, but the reluctance of the stick is we really don't know if it's just how broad that practice is. Now, you know, the interesting thing is I've talked to different school board members, talked to different superintendents, and it's just kind of a shrug. That's the way we've always done it. So, have you internally talked about ways in which to track so that we could even determine the magnitude of that?
So since I started on January 12th, yes, we have had conversations about how we can, what information we can collect in the future to actually help districts present information to us that we think will be more helpful for them in their own planning. And so, yes, we've had those conversations. I have intentionally delayed very detailed conversations about that, waiting for the end of the legislative session so that we are putting all those things together. But yes, I've started those conversations about what information can we collect. And just back to your point about the information that is currently required.
Right.
And so the current law requires that districts report that to the State Board of Education. And there isn't a requirement to present anything to the legislature in the current law.
Right.
And I would say that based on the way we get information presented to us, I don't know what report I would put together that would help anybody. So yes, I've started those conversations about how can we change our own data collection to make that a better system.
Well, and part of the discussion is we know some school districts have business managers or finance directors. Some use Greenbush or other organizations to provide that service. We've not even been able to get a handle on, I don't think that legislative post audit even identifies if that is being done internally or if they're using an external service to process the budgets, if you will.
And there are two parts of that. One, a lot of times the service is for preparing the budget for publication and then presenting it to us on the funding side. The districts would be more involved on the spending side. So, I mean, because they're deciding who they're hiring and what they're doing and those kinds of things. But I would say district capacity to do that at different levels varies significantly among our 286 districts.
Yes, I just received that text that public health is wrapped up, so my vice chair will be here as soon as she runs across the hall, I think, and then we'll get going. Absolutely. Representative Williams.
Since we've got you here on the hot seat. Thank you, Madam Chair. So in the bill, we actually maintain some items for at risk that were currently in law. And I'm just wondering if we need these, you know, if we're going to clean up legislation here, it might be wise to, so I would just turn everyone's attention to page 46 in the bill. 46, and it would be line 37 on page 46. We've made quite a few updates, and if we want to do something that's helpful and effective for schools, I think eliminating lines is always helpful and effective. So that is basically, it says delivery of at-risk and provisional at-risk programs or services by a school district may include. And I'm wondering, what benefit do we have of that list right there?
Yeah.
Dr. Harwood, any benefit? Because you have your list.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know that it needs to be in
Okay.
statute because, I mean, the other thing we need to do is make sure that the things that are on that list actually meet the rest of the statute. And looking at them, I think most of them would. Not all of them would have had 5 years of peer review, but with our current list, all of those could show up. So,
Sure. And I think, that, and I look at this, I see extra support within the class. We would not want anyone to put that down as their target practice, extra support. We'd want more explanation than extra support. And by leaving this in here, it almost codifies that that's an evidence-based practice. And it could be if it were more specified, but in its current form. So I don't know, I'm just going to make a motion, Madam Chair, if my partners here are good with it, to offer to just eliminate lines 37, just eliminate them through the next page on page 2 and just get rid of that list. Yeah, just eliminate it, because if you were in agreement that that's a redundancy, also can be confusing.
Well, I do think with regard to the offering of that amendment, it makes sense because some folks for tutorial assistance are just using classmates to provide tutoring. And that really doesn't fit within the criteria either. You could say it. I mean, I know that that's what happens at the university level. I don't know that that's that effective. And we've talked about it before as far as Susie is reading at the 6th grade level. She's in 3rd grade. Johnny isn't even at the 3rd grade level. And so pairing them together, Susie can't teach Johnny how to read.
And I would say that I think there is some research that says that peer tutoring is effective, but it also doesn't have any funding. I mean, you have students working together, but I think the only way that the tutoring would fall in as an expense would be if you are actually hiring students in some way to tutor other students. And that's not a very common practice, certainly not in the 5th grade.
Right.
So.
Oh, you'd be surprised. Before school, after school. Yeah. Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now that I have a paper copy and I'm not scrolling on my computer screen, can I get a clarification of that amendment?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Basically, and Nick can go over that as well, but it's on it's the section on page 46 that says delivery of at-risk and provisional at-risk programs.
That's on line 37 where it starts out.
Oh, so I'm sorry. So yeah, I will take one of those new ones too. I'm using the one I used. So Nick, you tell them where it is.
I'll take a new one. Yes. Thank you.
Got 2 more.
We're good.
So there was a House Committee of the Whole amendment, which knocks some lines downward just a little bit. So in the bill as amended by House Committee of the Whole, the proposal is on page 47, and it would be striking lines 7 through 15.
Thank you. That makes much more sense because I was on 46 and I'm like, this is not the words that I'm seeing. So thank you.
Okay, so we made that. Do we have the right pages for that peer review? Also,
Yes, I've got those pages noted. I will note that there is one other instance of peer review that's used in the definitions, but it seemed like we were talking about the peer review process for provisional programs and not necessarily evidence-based instruction.
right. Okay, thank you. So, oh, hold on just a second. So at this time, I would like us to just kind of jump into something that I think I would like to see addressed. And so I will make an offer, and it has to do with the at-risk student accountability plans, where we are developing the cohorts. And, one of the things that I had several questions about yesterday, still have some questions about it, And so in diving a little bit more into it, it shows that, at least in the legislation, it's beginning in the school year 24-25, that each school district's at-risk student accountability plan. So they're going to identify at least one cohort group of students in grade 3, and then a cohort group of students in kindergarten or any of the grades 1 through 8. So when I think of the number of school districts that we have, I think of the questions that I had for the really small districts as well as the really large districts. I don't think that we have necessarily hammered that out quite out yet. And so I can only imagine someone that maybe is a finalist to be a new superintendent, or maybe someone that just started this year, so that next year would be their second year. Looking at this and where do I start with that? And so my ask is, or my recommendation is, that we push the statewide start by 1 year. But I don't want us to just have it sitting there on the shelf for a year. So my ask would also include that we would do a pilot program, because the collection of longitudinal information, and so let's just use the example of the 4 practice tests. You could take the second week of school and do the first practice assessment test. Look at those results. Compare it. If it was a 4th grade class, I would compare it to what the state assessment was the prior spring to address what was lost. Now that's only if it's the adjusted 4th grade assessment, type of thing. But I would look at prior year, a look at the new score, implement some plans or strategies for interventions for the children that appear to need it, and then 6 to 9 weeks later, do that second assessment. So that's how a district could start to build longitudinal. It wouldn't be any extra money, but it would be very intentional. But to try and incorporate that statewide, I think is a heavy, heavy lift. We also know that we don't know where districts are on their letters training or any type of science of reading and literacy training. We don't know where districts are. But what I would like to see is that we pilot this. I'm not going to pick who those districts are, but I'd like us to limit it to no more than 10 districts. I would like to see diversity in those districts. So I would like to see some districts that have already kind of jumped in with both feet as far as letters training and literacy training. Some districts that honestly haven't really jumped on board at all. So they would just kind of be starting that process with the blueprint. I would like to see a variety of rural, suburban, don't have to have urban, because we have very few urban districts, but that could be a possibility. But the different sizes, so that, also in the bill, we're forming that task force that is going to be looking at new funding. So I see superintendents, or at least principals, being able to come and provide that task force with some real information that before this time next year, they could provide some information, some data that could help drive, perhaps help us come up with, for a larger district, is it a cohort per elementary school building, or is it a cohort that's made up of a child from each district building? But to just find out as what were some of the stumbling blocks, what was really working, the data that they were collecting, and how it was helping them drive, because then essentially those districts can help other like districts when we do a statewide. So that would be the ask from the Senate side. Yes, questions?
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. And I think that sounds really good. Is there a way that we could get that written maybe tomorrow so that we could look at it? But it sounds good. And my only question is, so I like the delay. So we wouldn't start 24 to 25 except for the pilot year. So then they would actually be starting 26 and 27. The formula expires in 27. So some would say, well, why would you even bother? But really, it's just about trying to understand what we can do to improve outcomes with kids. And so it's good regardless of an expiration of a formula. My only thought, so no problems with that. My only, yes.
So beginning in 24, 25. So next fall would be the pilot. The following year,
Right.
5 and 6 would be the statewide.
Right, 25, 26. Sorry, my apologies. My apologies on that. Yep.
So that gives us time
Yes.
with regard
A
to,
couple of years.
Yeah.
Couple of years into the process. And I'd like to formally accept that with our group's discussion tomorrow morning, because I'd like to see it laid out. And then my question is, are you envisioning then that gives us a year to maybe change this cohort group with something better that you have been able to ascertain from the pilot?
I think it would allow us to add more clarity. I don't know that everything has to be in statute, but I think that guidance, and it may be that for school districts of a certain size and smaller, would just have maybe 2 cohorts, and the larger we might address in a different way. But again, um, I think of all of the different districts that are in my Senate district, and I've got the smallest and some of the largest and some of the fastest growing. So I think that would allow us to really drill down a little bit more clearly what we're looking for. Would also help, I think, the Board of Education as well as the department, and all of the other support groups, USA, KSB, and so forth, KNEA, to build out for that.
So great. Thank you for that clarification. And then I would have a request from the department it, on this topic. If we're looking at delaying it, if we're looking at a pilot, if we're looking at what we currently have, and we've worked a little bit on this together, is there anything else in that process that could be cleaner, that could be better at determining if we're closing the gap between those that are paid, those that are not paid lunch, or are at-risk students? I want to be sure we're measuring something that is helpful to our districts and helpful to this body. And so if you would take another look at what we have in the bill and see, is there a way to simplify, clean it up, provide more clarity, that would be appreciated also as we consider this. Thank you.
So from our revisers, you think you can get some language that can be seen tomorrow morning? Okay. And then you'll be able to kind of look at that and then respond? Okay. So let's go to the real sticky wicket, and that's money. So in looking at the conference comparison of positions, we see that that the House position, and what you passed out of committee and passed across the floor. So 75 million is additional dollars are going to special education aid. And that came from SGF. And then 2.5 million of federal funds were put into special education. So that's above and beyond what is already factored in. That is correct. Okay. And then So there was the swap of funding of the 93.4 million to maintain the 20 mills. Is that correct? Okay. I understand that in tax committee, they're talking about reducing the 20 mills to 18 mills, and that would require additional backfill. So I want us to just put an asterisk there with regard to the 93.4 million. Because I know that is something that is going to get netted out probably by tomorrow morning. So talk to us a little bit about the mentor teacher program as well as professional development. Could you talk to us as far as that funding is additional SGF?
Sure. So regarding, Madam Chair, professional development, as I was going through the monies, I did note that there are many different funds that provide professional development. This is not the only one. And this is a $1.9 million increase to that. So I think there was already 2 point something million in that, Jennifer. Nevertheless, as she's kind of double checking on that, that was an increase that it's the same increase that the governor included. But what we said was professional development has to be used for the dyslexia, reading, or math improvement because there's a push in those areas of improvement. So any additional monies would be for that. And she said there was 1.8 prior. So this would be 1.9 in addition to an existing 1.8. So the original amount would be used currently in current status for whatever this department approved. But the additional money had to be really focused on these areas. And then the mentor program, which is line 8, that program also mirrors what the governor put in hers, but it had no requirement. So for this amount of money above what was originally being funded, and maybe tell me if maybe that was the 2 point something. No. Oh, 1.5. I don't know why. 1.3. Originally it was 1.3. So then it goes up to 2.3. Also, that has to be used for the science of reading. And that would be for grades K through 5. So that's it to put the requirement.
Okay, talk to us a little bit about item 11.
All right, item 11. So currently, we have been providing for about 5 years. There are 2 years that we did not provide the safe and secure funding. Maybe it was 2017, 2018. No, that wasn't right. But there are 2 years in the last 5 that we have not provided the safe and secure. But it's been approximately $4 to $5 million every year. So this is above and beyond Gannon funding, and we have allowed school districts to use this money in a match capacity, and it had to be for something to keep their schools safe. But this program is actually one in which it's patented, it's verified, and through federal programs. That means that these validation or these recognitions are very unique, and we can't put this out to bid because there's nobody else that does what they do. They have clearances, they have DoD validations, accreditations, US government recognition and validations, and patents. And so basically what they do is for $5 million, we would not ask any school to match. This would be a pilot program. We would get, with $5 million, it would last for 3 years, and it would be 5,600 licenses over 3 years. And that each school, that licenses actually go for every single camera. So you might be able to fund between 112 to 230 schools, depending on the number of cameras. What it does, it's a detection software using AI that is actually connected with existing cameras. And this software has an algorithm that's able to detect a firearm, and that includes broad range over 300 different types of firearms and 2,000 different classes, from ARs to AKs to shotguns to rifles to revolvers. It is able to detect them if they are not concealed in about 1 to 3 seconds. It will go to their source center and it will be verified by a human that's actually a retired military. They will verify whether or not that is a fake, if they perceive that as a fake firearm, a real threat, they can de-escalate, and then they will notify simultaneously. It sends out notifications to all types of systems, 911 call centers, the SRO, and so forth. So that is what we included because of the uniqueness of what it is offering that nobody else can do. And we would create a pilot. I will note, Madam Chair, that though this is for 3 years, it would cover 112 to 230 schools for 3 years. And we have over 1,300 schools in the district or in Kansas that are public, but we have only 318 high schools that are public schools. So I don't think we specified priority, did we, Nick, for high schools? If we didn't, that's something that could be considered. And then if it was something that software capability was showing itself to be reliable, and an advantage to Kansas schools for safety, then next year, then the legislature could look at another group and it would last for 3 years as well.
But there was no RFP process on this.
No, and the reason, again, it comes back to two main reasons. Number one, when we did the Mathination, that RFP process took many, many months. And so we lost a lot of time in that. And so we didn't get the outcomes that we thought we would. And secondly, you can't do if you did an RFP for this particular item, you would not have the same result. It also would waste valuable time when we're talking about the safety of our children. And also because since there is there's no match on this, school districts that participate do not lose any dollars by being part of this. But because this is a patented, we did not feel that there was another alternative.
Okay, so you had one hearing about Zero Eyes, is that correct?
We had one informational in K-12. We also had an informational hearing in appropriations, and I believe higher ed may have as well. And I do believe that it was encouraged for members to read more and to find out more about it, and did so.
So at this time, what I would like to propose is that I appreciate the explanation of all of this. So what I would like to propose is when we are looking at the CPI average, that $75 million from the CPI average go toward special education state aid. That would be the increase. And then maintain the 2.5 million that is from the federal ARPA funds. So rather than SGF, it is still SGF, but it is coming from the CPI. And that the remainder of that CPI average would then be dispersed as it has been in prior years. So that is something that I know you are going to, as the other half of the conference committee, are going to need to have time to discuss. It's certainly not, and I want for all of those that are watching and those that are sitting here, this is our first step. So yesterday we went through a large bill that had some significant changes. And that was an informational hearing for the most part yesterday in conference committee. So today we are simply in our first step. I can't control what is sent out in social media, but the sky is not falling. We are going to meet again tomorrow in the morning. We have received notification that, at least on the Senate side, there is not going to be any meeting prior to 10. We gavel in at 10. I don't know if you have heard anything as well. 10 o'clock. So if we want to meet conference committee tomorrow morning at 9 and we come back and move together, then that would be my ask. So go back and talk to your leadership.
We can tell you, I've already talked to him. 9 o'clock's great.
Okay.
I was going to say 8, so 9's even better.
9 is even better. That gives the Department of Education extra time to get some answers for us. The sky is not falling. Yes, Senator Sykes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for so on the offer that you just did, that was on this bed. Was there anything else on this budget, like where were you talking about the zero eyes and any of this? Oh, it was just specific. So
It was just specific to CPI, the 75 million going toward towards SPED, additional, the 2.5 million of ARPA, and the rest being distributed as it has in prior years.
thank you.
Okay. So I'm not seeing any further questions. I'm not seeing any further discussion. So we will be adjourned and we will meet back here tomorrow morning at 9.